so it should come to no surprise to anyone by now that UFC 249 was cancelled. Obviously, with the current pandemic and everything else that's going on, states are closing down, travel is becoming wild, so UFC 249 was cancelled. It should be noted that Dana White was more or less forced by Disney and ESPN, but since I did promise to give this video, I figured why not, because I hope that this fight still happens before the end of the year. If it doesn't, I quit. I'm giving up on this fight, and I'm sure it's the same for everyone else. So, right, 249 was supposed to be main evented by Tony Ferguson versus Khabib Nurmagomedov, but Khabib actually pulled out because he went back to Russia, and of course, fearing for public safety and his own safety, he opted not to come back to the States. Also because the UFC did not have a venue for the longest time. Like, the UFC kept saying they had a venue, but nothing was ever officially made public. So yeah, people blamed Khabib for pulling out, but I don't really. Like, how do you expect me to commit to something you can't even tell me where it's gonna happen? So yeah, I'm on his side on this one. And it was supposed to be Tony versus Gaethje for the interim. I should talk about that hopefully in the end, but I will talk about what I feel would have been or will be the deciding factor should Khabib and Tony ever actually meet. And it boils down to something I've noticed from Tony Ferguson's last 3 fights. Tony Ferguson's last 3 opponents, Kevin Lee, Anthony Pettis, and Donald Cerrone. There was something that happened in all 3 of these fights that actually is very good indication of Tony Ferguson's style. A lot of people give praise Tony Ferguson's conditioning, his cardio, and his conditioning is world class. I think his wrestling background is where that comes from. But there's one thing I'm not sure people have noticed, and that's that Tony Ferguson never starts a fight at 100%. The way it was described once, I believe it was Chael Sonnen who said that Ferguson doesn't care if he loses a round, he cares if he wins the fight, which is true, and it shows in his style. The first round of almost every Ferguson fight will usually go to his opponent. Well, not always, but his opponents usually have the best glimpses of success in the first round. Ferguson isn't a person who starts a fight at 100%. He starts at 40, maybe 60%, but then increases his pace as the fight goes on. And what I mean by this, let's look at the 3 fights I'm talking about. The Kevin Lee fight. The Kevin Lee fight, both Ferguson and Lee came out aggressive. They dropped each other, but Lee was able to secure a takedown on Ferguson. But of course, Ferguson, being Tony Ferguson, made it a nightmare for Kevin Lee by threatening submissions and, of course, being a nuisance on the ground. But there was a point where Lee was able to get in full mount, and he started beating the heck out of Ferguson. That was, of course, till the end of the round. But then in the second round, Lee couldn't get that close to Ferguson. Like, Ferguson first of all took the center of the octagon. He essentially elbowed him with an elbow that was so epic it was like out of a movie. But the most surprising factor was the fact that Lee, who was able to get good takedowns in the first round, was failing. Ferguson was like keeping his distance. He was sprawling so fast that Lee could barely get close to him. And this is different because in the first round, Lee was having success. Yes, you could say Lee was more tired, but the difference was quite shocking to the fact that Ferguson wasn't letting him get the takedown. Then the third round happened. Lee was able to get a takedown, but Ferguson threatened an armbar that was so wild that Lee just said, you know what, I'm going to rest. But then Ferguson was like, nah, not today. Triangled him and won. One thing to take away is that Lee had early success, but then the moment he showed he was a threat to Ferguson, Ferguson turned up the pace. Then we have Anthony Pettis. Pettis is one of the best illustrations of this point. The first round, he kept moving around, hitting Ferguson on the leg. Obviously, because Ferguson had just come back from knee surgery, Pettis kept hitting the leg, but Ferguson kept coming forward, stepping up, pushing the pace little by little. He started at a particular pace, but then increased the tempo as the fight went on. By the end of the first, you could tell Pettis was in trouble and that Ferguson had found his groove. Very early in the second round, Pettis hit Ferguson with an overhand right. It was an overhand right that sent Ferguson to the ground. In fact, I counted 3 times Anthony Pettis made Tony Ferguson go to the ground. And he got on top of Ferguson, and it was basically a weird situation since both of them are very good in their jiu-jitsu game, so it was an interesting scenario. But Pettis wasn't able to end the fight. And then once the fight got standing, it was the beginning of the end for Pettis. Ferguson pressured Pettis in the first round, but the second round was just insane. Like, Pettis' butt did not leave the octagon cage. It was that bad. Like, Pettis was essentially glued to the octagon cage. He couldn't get distance. Ferguson was not letting him breathe. It was insane. It was nuts. And then, of course, we all know that Pettis broke his hand and couldn't come out for the third round, and that's what happened. But the thing to take away is that there was an instant where Pettis could have ended the fight, and he just couldn't. And the moment he showed himself to be a threat, Ferguson said, no, and turned up the pace. Down on Cerrone. The first round, I feel Cerrone won. Some people say Ferguson won the first round, but Cerrone was more or less outstriking Ferguson. He not only outstriking, but his accuracy was on point. So the first round, I gave that round to Cerrone. But then the second round was a different story. Cerrone got beat up bad. Like, for every one punch Cerrone was landing, Ferguson was landing 3 or 4. And Ferguson was just throwing in the most unusual ways. He wasn't just throwing punches, he was throwing elbows, he was throwing kicks. Like, I was even amazed that Cerrone was able to avoid getting pressure. This was just a pure striking fest. Cerrone did get one takedown, but you know, his face was so messed up that, and of course his eyes swelled shut by the end of the second round, that he couldn't come out for the third. The key thing to take away is that in all 3 of these fights, Ferguson's opponents demonstrated an ability to finish him, and the moment they did, he turned up the pace. He didn't start the fight at 100%, he started at 40-50%. His opponents were able to, for a few seconds or few minutes, able to either match or surpass his pace, and then he turned it up again. For lack of a better term, think of it like this. Imagine if someone like Khabib, who possibly hits harder than Pettis, was the one that hit Ferguson, and if, let's say, Khabib, like Kevin Lee, was able to get top position. What do you think would happen? Ferguson, for lack of a better term, just does not start a fight at 100%, and because of that, his opponent's best chance of beating him is in the first round, or let's just say when Ferguson is still in that initial groove, when he finds that first pace that he sets, because he doesn't start at 100%, he starts at a certain pace, like 40, maybe 50%, but then at some point he turns it up. So before he turns up the pace is any opponent's best shot. So my biggest deciding factor here was that if Khabib was to go for, let's say, the fight ending sequence of, let's say, he hits Ferguson with an overhand right, he shoots for a takedown, but then goes for an overhand right, drops Ferguson, and let's be honest, Ferguson has been dropped multiple times, and then gets on top of Ferguson and then tries to end the fight right there and then, but then fails, that would be an issue. But he could finish Ferguson, because Ferguson, like I said, didn't start 100%. But if he was to fail to finish Ferguson, then it's get worse for Khabib, because Ferguson would not allow himself to be compromised again. So that's what I think would have been the fight, would have been the deciding factor. Those first few minutes where Ferguson sets his initial pace, and then Khabib would try to end the fight in that instance, because he'd have to pick his moment well. Like, he'd have to go for the fight ending sequence at the right moment. Which is why I was afraid of the fight with Gaethje for Ferguson, because Gaethje does start the fight at 100%, and he can leg kick Ferguson and knock him out. Like I said, Ferguson doesn't start 100%, but Gaethje does. And even when Gaethje gets tired, he damages his opponent so bad that even they can't do anything. So this is my opinion. I hope you guys appreciated these videos. I saw you guys really liked the first video I did. Thank you so much. And I'm in 64. I've never stopped moving forward. Thank you so very much for watching, and see you guys in the next one.